In this lesson, we will use the card node along with the scene node to give our image the capability of being used in 3D space. We will also split the image apart into different positions in Z-space. Okay, so in between our lessons, I went back and roto painted the rest of these nodes. So you can see how there's just a little bit more information on these images that originally just have the roto shape. Now I've gone back in and roto painted just to make them a little bit larger. So now that we have more information to work with, let's go ahead and start pushing these around in 3D space. To do this, we're going to need some card nodes. A card node is going to give you the ability to basically take a 2D image like this and place it in 3D space. So let's just hover over the empty area of our node graph, hit the Tab key, and we'll type in card. Now you don't want to use card 3D, that's something different. You just want regular card. And then we'll just put this at the end of this little kind of stack here. And then just plug that image pipe into the roto paint. Now let's go ahead and view this card. You can just hit the 1 key to jump to that. And it's going to put you in 3D mode. You can see how this is the 3D viewer now. So if I just hover over this, I can zoom backwards. And you can see how my image has been placed in 3D. But it's a little bit hard to tell until you start rotating around. So let's hold down the Control key. And you can click and drag, and now you can really start to see how just seeing that perspective grid on the ground really makes it feel like you're in a 3D space. So if we just go back to kind of to normal here, you'll notice that this card is a little bit too low when it comes to how far this is intersecting the ground plane. So we need to push this up in space a little bit. So if we come down here to our translation, that's going to be our y-axis. If you can see that if I have the card selected, I have those little handles there. There's the y. You can just kind of barely see that that's the y up there. So let's push the y up. Let's just try a 1. And you can see that this is a pretty small number, but it pushes that y up pretty far. So basically what it did was it was 1 times the whole size of that card. So it was pushed up its whole height. So that's not really what I'm wanting to do. So let's put in a 0.5. A little bit better. I really want to get this to where this area where I've painted is about what's intersecting the ground. So let's try a 0.25, and that looks a little bit better. Now I think we would probably be safe to just go ahead and grab the card and drag it down just like that. And that looks pretty good. That looks like that is intersecting. And I'm just holding the middle wheel, just pushing that down and then dragging around to see this view. Maybe a little bit further. Okay, that looks pretty good. Now, let's go ahead and add a card for our second roto paint. So that's going to be for this image right here. So we'll just, again, hit Tab, select the card, hit Enter, and then we'll plug that in. And that's automatically going to pop that up there for us. Now, one of the problems, I'm going to Control drag, is that now these are kind of overlapping, and that's definitely not really what I want to do. So I want to start kind of pushing these back in space as we work. So this first card that we have, card 1, is the one that I'm going to want to be furthest back because that's my clouds. So let's go ahead in our Z space and put in something like a 2.5. So you can see how far that pushed that back, 2.5, pretty significant amount that it pushed that back. And then I just want to reduce that number by 0.5 each time I move one of these back. So we'll come up here to card 2, which has the mountains displayed, and we'll put in just a regular 2 into that Z space. So now that's 0.5 back from the 2.5, and then we can just continue adding. Now again, I want to raise this up so it's not so far down in the ground plane here. So just grab that, you just want to grab that card 2 and pull that up out of the ground. And we'll play around a little bit with making sure that we have any areas that aren't being covered up. We might need to scale up this card in the back for our sky, but for now I just want to get them into place. Okay, let's go ahead and do this for our others. I'm just going to go ahead and add cards for the rest of them. So we'll hit tab again, enter, and then we'll plug that in. Make sure you're plugging it into the Roto Paint node so you get all of that information. It's a little bit hard to unplug. There we go. And I'll just hit tab again, enter again. Just get the rest of these plugged in here really quickly. Just hitting tab and enter to bring on those extra card nodes. Just like that. Okay, so now that those are all in place, let's go ahead and place them in Z space as well. So we left off with card 2, so let's come down here to card 3, and if we left off at 2, we'll do this one at 1.5. So just type in 1.5. That'll push this one backwards. And then you can go ahead and zoom in here and figure out where this needs to kind of come up a little bit if necessary. Now, one of the things that I'm noticing is that this card is basically flipped. So if I want the front of my image right here to look like it did in the 2D image, you can see how the house is on this side. That's not really what we're getting the way that we're working right now. They're being layered with the sky in the background, the mountains in front, and then this part with the house, but it's basically all been flipped. So we actually need to work backwards. So instead of putting positive values in the Z space, we want to put negative values. So all we have to do is just come in here, go in front of that value that we've put in, and put a negative symbol in front of that. So negative 2.5, negative 2, and negative 1.5. And now, if I just rotate this around, you can see that that makes a lot more sense with our image. Okay, so let's kind of get back in here and make sure that this isn't too far down in the ground. So you may just have to rotate a little bit to see where exactly that's intersecting. Looks like that's probably pretty good right about there, actually. You might need to bring it up a little bit later, but for now, this is good. Okay, then we've got our mountain on card 4. It's really more of a hill. So we'll put this one instead of, let's see, we had negative 1.5, so we'll put this one at just a negative 1. And then we can zoom in a little bit and make sure that you bring that up there. That one was pretty easy to see how far down it was. And then our last one, which is the water on card. Oh, actually, we have one more in between here, which is the little dock. So let's skip that one for a second, actually, and we'll just move on to card 6. So that's the card 6 is going to be the water. And so we'll put card 6 at, let's see, for card 4, we did a negative 1. So this will be negative 0.5. Okay, so now let's just kind of rotate around over here. Not that plane. And you can see kind of what these look like. So we've got the water, the smaller hill, the bigger hill with the house, the dark mountains, and the sky. Now we've got this little dock here. And basically what I want to do with this is kind of put it in between these two layers. So I don't want it to be a full half step in between. And I also want it to be rotated a bit. So I'm going to kind of pull this out here. Then I'm going to hold Control to bring up that rotation. And then we'll just grab that on the Y and kind of rotate that out just like that. So now that bridge has been rotated. We can bring it up a little bit so that it's visible. And you can kind of see what that looks like now. It's just a little bit different than the way it was before. It has just more perspective now that the front of it is a little bit closer. You can see how it's kind of tilted out that way. Okay, so now let's go ahead and bring up the water. Now the water is going to be a little bit of a different story. So even though I want it in place as far as that 0.5 goes, I want to rotate the water flat and down. So let's see here. If I hold Control, let's zoom in a little bit. I want to rotate it this way to make it lie flat. So that's going to be the x-axis. So let's come in here and we'll do the x on 90 degrees. So that looks like it rotated it this way, and I would like to rotate it back that way. So let's do a negative 90 degrees. Perfect. Okay, so now it's been rotated backwards, and we can just grab this and pull it back a little bit. Now, I need this to take up some more room. So we can come down here to our uniform scale, kind of pump that up a bit, but I really need it to be taller. So instead of doing the uniform scale, let's go ahead and just pump up the scale in the y-axis. So I'm going to turn this up to a 3, and then let's just see what that looks like. So that looks pretty good. It's pretty large. We might not need it to be quite that big, but I'm just going to go ahead. We'll pull this around here. We'll just kind of zoom in on our scene. Just take a look at everything. So obviously it's up too high, so let's grab that Z handle and we'll push this down just to where it kind of starts to penetrate with some of these other layers down here. And that's looking really good just like that. Okay. Now, it's at a great place as far as how far up it is when compared to the floor, but I think I still want this to be a little bit longer. I'd like it to go back a little bit closer to these mountains. So let's turn that Y scale up again. Let's turn it to something like a 6. And then, of course, we'll have to grab that Y handle and pull it back some. Okay, that's looking pretty good. So now let's take a look at what happens in our 2D view. So I'm just going to switch over to 2D. And you can see that we don't have anything visible. So I'm going to switch back over to the 3D. And the reason why we don't have anything visible is because we don't have anything in here that can read all of these different cards. So we're going to have to use a couple different nodes in the next lesson to make all of these pieces visible. So we're going to be using a scanline render node and a camera node. Now I did say in this lesson we would be using a scene node, so we can go ahead and plug that in. And a scene node, we can just hit tab, type in scene, and a scene node is easy. You basically will just hook all of the pipes from the scene node up to, or actually all of the pipes from your card nodes up to your scene node. So it starts out with 1, but then you'll just continue to plug the rest of them in, just like this. So basically a scene node gives all your card nodes a place to live. So if we select the scene node and go to 2D, it's still invisible because we don't have that scanline render node. But you have to have the scene node first for all of them to go into for the scanline render node to know what it needs to look at, because it needs one thing to be plugged into it instead of all of those individual cards. So the scene is kind of just a container that's going to hold all those pieces together. And then the scanline render node will let us view all of those pieces together. So now that we have that set up, we're ready to add in those next 2 nodes, and we're going to do that in the next lesson.